so many egg seizures at the border right now?
Well, it does is as a result of the avian influenza epidemic that's plaguing North America now. It hits Canada as well as the United States. But the Americans, they have a fundamentally different egg laying system than we do in Canada, which has resulted in massive numbers of hen deaths, which has taken literally hundreds of millions of eggs out of the national inventory.
And we know that consumers are paying a lot more for eggs. You know, we mentioned this off the top, but here's just how much more. As of February, a dozen eggs cost around $5.90 US. So that works out to about $8.42 Canadian. In Canada, a dozen eggs is like half that, $4.89. So if we're looking around tariffs and trade, could Canada use this as leverage during our ongoing negotiations?
No, I don't think so. We have a supply managed system in Canada, which is just as the name suggests, it's managing supply. We introduced it in 1972, and it's Canadian production for Canadian consumers. So we match the number of eggs being laid annually in the country with the number of eggs being consumed in the country. So we really have no surplus eggs whatsoever. It's actually a really, really good system, and it prevents the kinds of surplus production, which is debilitating in terms of time, energy, resources. We actually produce the number of eggs that Canadians need. So we are very, very focused on Canadian supply, and it provides food security for Canadians. We see we're not paying big prices for eggs now as they are in the United States. So it provides for food security, and it's a really good Canadian system to respond to Canadian demands and Canadian needs, but we really don't have any excess supply to ship to the U.S.
Yeah, I want to dig into that a little further, because what's been interesting about, all this talk around tariffs is people are understanding how different industries in our country work. So let's talk about eggs. Canada's supply management model, as you say, is part of the reason that we haven't been hit as harshly in our egg production by the avian flu. Our farms, to my understanding, are smaller, they're more diversified across the country, whereas those U.S. farms are larger and more centralized. So when something like avian flu hits, it hits really hard. Is this U.S. model sustainable long term?
I tend to think not. And in fact, in the U.S. now, they have egg farms. For example, in the state of Iowa, it's the largest egg producing state in the union, a state of only 3 million people, but they have 44 million layers in that state. The average farm size is 2 million birds. And when you can imagine when it's hit with avian influenza, the entire farm has to be euthanized simply because avian influenza is such a virulent epidemic and virus. So when that happens, of course, it removes millions of eggs from the national inventory, which then results in the kinds of shocks to the system that we're seeing now. For the first time in the U.S. since really the early 1970s when they introduced this model, for the first time they're beginning to talk about smaller egg farms closer to the communities that they serve. And I would tend to think that it's not a farm, it's an agribusiness. That companies are traded on the New York Stock Exchange. I would think that the kind of agriculture they have in the U.S., which emphasizes bigness above all else, isn't really sustainable in this world of climate change, of it seems increasingly virulent viruses being spread around the world. So I think that our system for sure is sustainable. I don't think that theirs can be said to be the same thing.
We started off this conversation talking about egg seizures, and some people have said that it's egg smuggling, but in fact what we found when we called down to the border was that people are buying eggs and not realizing they can't bring them across the border. So a lot of it is just people are claiming it and then having them seized. What I'm curious about is U.S. President Donald Trump has reached out to Finland, he's reached out to Denmark, he's even gone as far as Turkey to see if they can import eggs from them, but he hasn't reached out to Canada. Why not?
I don't really know why he hasn't reached out to us, unless somebody has told him that we don't have surplus eggs in Canada available for export. We do export a tiny amount of liquid egg to the U.S., but not very much. So I don't really understand. As I say, perhaps one of his advisors has told him that Canada has a supply managed system and no excess supply. As it turns out, of course, the Europeans also don't have excess supply. And in fact, many of those same European countries are also looking to import eggs for roughly the same reasons that the Americans need to because of avian influenza.
Hey, right now, you've probably noticed we're showing pictures of the White House and the Easter egg hunt, which is coming up. And there are thousands of eggs that need to be laid for this annual Easter egg hunt. Where do you think they're going to get the eggs? When I say thousands, I mean like 30,000.
Well, okay. This is an annual tradition in the White House. They might have to forego it this year. I don't know. There really isn't an excess supply of eggs around the world, shell eggs, the kind that people like to eat for their morning breakfasts, for sure. There isn't an excess supply around the world. They are also very, very difficult to transport, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
Shell eggs don't travel well at all. So again, this is something that, it may be the first of many changes to American traditions at the White House and going forward into the future.
First of many changes, period. Bruce Muirhead,
Yes.
Egg Farmers of Canada Public Policy Chair and Prof at the University of Waterloo. Great conversation this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne-Marie.